Hello friends, welcome to today's session of object oriented programming. So in today's session we will be talking about classes, objects and methods in detail. So looking at OOPS. OOPS is generally known as object oriented programming system or structure. Sometimes we can also omit this entire structure or system keywords and we can simply resort to object oriented programming. So this is also a correct way of representation for OOP full form. So this is basically a programming paradigm or a methodology. By paradigm we actually mean that it is basically a style of doing something. Like a methodology, we have a particular set of process and procedures in order to do any particular activity. Similar way, this OOPS is also a programming paradigm through which we can develop anything. Now within this programming paradigm there are different styles or different methodologies. So some of them are write here some of the names. So first one that we comes under this programming paradigm is object oriented paradigm. Then we have procedural paradigm. We also have functional paradigm. Then we have logical paradigm. And we also have structured paradigm. So all these paradigms are basically programming paradigm or methodology which we can opt for when we are developing any particular project or any particular program. So in our course we will be strictly resorting to the object oriented paradigm only, and we will also, if time permits, we shall also discuss the other programming paradigms briefly. However, it is for our understanding that since this course is entirely based with Java and object oriented programming, so we will be strictly limiting our discussion to object oriented paradigm only. So talking about OOPS, so there are several languages which are involved in object oriented programming. So languages, as in we have already done C in our previous semesters. So here also there are several languages which strictly follow object oriented programming style or object oriented programming paradigm. So the first one to follow this was Smalltalk. So Smalltalk is the first language which Smalltalk is the first language which strictly resorted to this OOP style or OOP paradigm. And there are also other languages like Java, C hash, C++, Python, etc. So there are several languages which basically use this concept, and we also have to understand that it is not possible for us to touch all of the languages for this particular course. We will be limiting our discussion to OOP using Java. So till now we have understood that this is basically a programming paradigm or a methodology, and there are several languages which can be applied over this particular paradigm, and Java is one of them, which is one of the main topics of discussion for this particular course. Okay, so there are 6 main pillars of OOP. So let us discuss them first. So 6, we'll list them and we will discuss them later. So there are 6 main pillars of OOP. So the first one is class. Then we have objects and methods. Objects and methods. The third one we have is inheritance. The fourth one that we have is polymorphism. So all these basically forms the six main pillars of OOP, which means that without this OOP concept is not complete, or OOP paradigm is not complete. So these are the four. The fifth one is abstraction, and the sixth one is encapsulation. So these are the six main pillars of OOP, without which the OOP paradigm or object to OOPS paradigm is not complete, right? So talking about class and object and methods. So today, in today's session, we will be talking about classes and methods, as well as objects in details. So when we talk about classes, let us go to the next page. Okay, so the first concept that we will be discussing, or the first pillar that we will be discussing about OOPS is class. So now what is a class? So when we talk about class, so class can be any collection. Okay, so now before going any further, I would like to mention here that everything that is an object oriented paradigm can be related to the real world concepts. So when we are talking about real world, we actually mean real world objects here. Okay, so when we are talking about class, since I have already mentioned that class is basically a collection, so let us consider any collection, any real world collection. So when we are talking about any collection, so animal is a collection. Okay, then birds can be a collection, vehicles can be a collection, furniture can be a collection. Okay, all these things can be collections, and within these collections there can be several things which are associated, which we will be discussing one by one. Now let's say animal. So animal can, when we are talking about collection, animal can either be a cat or a mouse. Bird can either be a parrot or a crow. Vehicles can be a car or a motorbike. Furniture can be a chair or a table, right? So basically all these classes, they represent what? They represent different collections. So I believe up till here we are clear about these things. So that class is basically a collection, and within this collection there can be several entities, right? So I'll just rub this off. So the first definition of class can be that a class is a collection. Okay, so whatever these entities are, the cat, the mouse, the parrot, crow, car and motorbike, so we can consider these as real world objects because they exist in real world. Okay, so a class is a collection of objects. Then the second definition is basically when we are talking about the animal class. Now animal does not exist in real world. Cat and mouse, they exist. However, this animal do not have any real world existence. Okay, the objects of course has some real world existence within it. Okay, so we can say that it is not a real world entity. It is not a real world entity, but it is some kind of a template, right? It is not a real time entity or real world entity, but it is some kind of a template which is holding the objects, different types of objects. It is capable of holding different types of objects. So we can consider that it is basically a template, or let's say a blueprint. Okay, template or a blueprint, or we can also call this as a prototype, which will hold the objects and their associated characteristics, right? The next important thing is that it does not occupy any memory, because animals, so since this does not have any real world existence, it will definitely do not have any space that it would occupy, right? Now cat, if you have a cat in your house, so that cat will hold some space, right? So objects are real world entities and objects will occupy space. However, the class, which is actually the template of this particular object, will not have any memory associated with it. So we can say that class does not occupy any memory. Now when you look into this particular class, okay, so when we are looking into this particular class, let's say the animal class, and I have two different animals here, which is a cat and a mouse. So let's go to the next page. So suppose I have this animal class with me, and I have a cat and a mouse as the objects here. Now this cat and mouse, they are capable of doing some kind of activity. Okay, let's say it can eat and it can chase. Okay, it can eat and it can chase. So these two are the two different activities which the objects, or which the animals can do, and we call them methods. We will discuss about these methods after some time, but however now we have to, since we are discussing class, first of all let us discuss the syntax of this particular class. So when we are talking about the syntax of class, it is basically access modifier, then we will use the keyword class, and then a camel case class name. So camel case class name means the first character of both the words, if there are two words, they should be capital, and then we will open brace and close brace, and this particular space will be known as the class body. Okay, so within this class body we can create methods, constructors, then we have fields. We can also work with fields, then we can work with blocks, we can also work with nested class, that means class within classes. So we can work with all of these within this particular class body. So this is the entire syntax of class. Okay, so I believe class is clear. So after this we will be moving to the next important pillar, which is methods. Okay, so when we are talking about methods, so this is also one of the important pillars of OOPS. So methods, they are actually a set of codes. So since it is written inside the class body, so it is basically a set or a collection of codes which performs any activity. Okay, which performs any activity. Suppose I have this animal class, and this animal class has cat and mouse, and they have two different methods. One is the animal can eat and the other one is animal can chase. So basically I am referring to these two activities which the animals are capable of performing. So this is basically a collection of codes which will perform any activity or any task. And why do we need to use these methods? So methods are basically used for code reusability, for code optimization and code reusability. So we will be able to optimize our codes better, so that we do not need to write long programs, and we can also make use of the existing codes or already written codes and reuse them in order to save our space and time. Okay, so the syntax of the method is something like this. Okay, so here also we have access modifier, then we have a return type, then we have the method name, and we have the parameter list. Okay, and then opening braces and closing braces. So within here, this is also known as the method body, and within this we can work with different types of objects and constructors. Now talking about this access modifier, these access modifiers are of 4 different types. One is public, the other one is private, we have protected, and then we have default. So from Java, this is all from the perspective of Java, and by default, if we do not mention here anything, or by default for Java, the access modifier is of default type. Return type could be anything that your method would be returning. It might be an int, or it might be a string, or it might be a class itself. So parameter list, again, it might be integers or different types of values that you want to pass through this particular parameter list you can pass. Okay, we will also see this with a program. So as of now, we just have to remember the syntax of the methods that these objects are basically capable of carrying out or capable of doing, which is eat and chase, for this example only. Okay, so we will move ahead to the next and one of the most important pillars of OOPS, which is objects. So we have already discussed that class is a collection of objects, and basically since we have already taken this example, I'll write the example here. So animal is the class, and we have a cat and a mouse as the objects here, which is capable of performing eat and chase activities. Now when we are talking about objects, so since we know that the class is a collection of objects, that means these objects essentially needs to be an instance of the class. So objects are instances of a class. Okay, and unlike class, which is not a real world entity, objects are basically real world entities. Okay, they actually have actual existence. Okay, real world entities. Okay, and the third important point is that since class do not occupy any space or any memory, objects, but since it has some real world existence, it will occupy a certain amount of memory. Okay, so these are the three important things we have to remember while we are dealing with objects. Now when we are talking about object, let's say cat is an object. Okay, so this objects will definitely have, suppose you have a cat in your house, so this object cat will have a name, right? Suppose if it is your pet cat, so it will have a name, right? So this name is known as the identity. So object will definitely have identity, and generally it should be unique. I mean, this identity always has to be unique. The second important thing that the object has is a state or attribute. Attribute could be anything like the age of the cat. Okay, it could be the age, or maybe the color. Okay, so these are some attributes of the cat or the object. So the object will have an identity, a unique identity, a state or the state or attribute. And the third important thing is that the object will definitely have behavior. So this object will demonstrate some kind of behavior. So cat basically demonstrates eat and chase behavior, right? Now, how do you create an object? So in order to create an object, so we'll talk about this, creating an object. So when we're creating an object in Java, it gives us 5 different ways of creating an object. First of all, by using the new keyword. The second one is new instance method. New instance method. The third one is clone method. Clone method. The fourth one is deserialization. Deserialization. And the fifth one is the factory method. So when we are talking about creating an object of a particular class, we have to focus on these 5 different ways of creating that particular object. However, we will be limiting our discussion to the new keyword because it is one of the most common and the easiest way of creating an object, right? Now we will talk about the different steps which is used, or which through which we can create the object. So object creation. Okay, so object creation. So the first step is declaration. So here we will declare an object of a particular class, and the second step is instantiation. So instantiation is basically we will be instantiating an instance or creating an instance of that particular object. Okay, instantiation. And the third one is initialization. Initialization. So if we look at our previous example, we have animal class. So let us name our animal as let us first of all declare our object. So it is done something like this. So first of all, I will write the name of the class followed by the name of the cat. Let us call the object or the name of the animal as name of the object as Pat. Okay, so this is my declaration is done, and after that I will be instantiating this. So how do I instantiate this? So I will be using the new keyword in order to instantiate this. So here I will be doing Pat is equal to new followed by a call to the constructor. So constructor we will be doing this in details later. So this is how you do a constructor call. Okay, and initialization is whenever you are calling the constructor, so your object is created. Okay, so first of all you will declare, and secondly you will instantiate and initialize. So instantiation you will do it using the new keyword, and initialization we will be initializing the object pat with some memory um, of the program. Okay, so if we want to write these two lines in one single line, you can write it something in something like this. Okay, animal pat is equal to new animal. So this animal followed by this bracket, this is basically a constructor call to the animal class. Okay, now this particular object is ready to carry out any activity. So if you want to what are the different methods that we saw of the animal? For example, so animal, we have cat and we have mouse. So these two were capable of doing activities eat and chase. So now pat dot eat, so this particular command wherein we are using this dot operator will be helping us to call this particular method. That means whatever is there within this particular method, that activity will be performed, or that particular code only will be executed. Okay, so this we can call any method using this dot operator preceded by the name of the object of any class. So I believe our classes, objects and methods are, we have understood some part of it. Okay, theoretically we will also see this in a program form in our next session. Okay, so before that, let us have a quick go through on the different things that we discussed today. So we'll start from the first part, which is object oriented programming system or structure. So basically this is a paradigm, and there are several languages which follows the object oriented programming style. Okay, there are 6 main pillars of OOPS: class, classes, objects and methods, inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, encapsulation. So these main pillars of OOPS basically helps us in order to develop any type of program or project using any of the programming languages. For our course we will be choosing Java. Alright, so we also had a discussion about class, where we understood that the class is a collection of objects and it is basically not a real world entity, whereas the objects are real world entities, but or real world entities which are capable of performing some activities which are known as methods. So classes are basically templates or blueprints, or you can also term it as prototypes, which do not occupy any memory. And this is the syntax of class, where there is an access modifier. We discussed the 4 different types of access modifier. We just listed them. We will be discussing them in details. Okay, followed by the class keyword and the class name. Within the class body we can work with methods, constructors, fields, blocks, nested classes, etc. Okay, and then we talked about methods, where we discussed that methods are basically a set or a collection of codes which performs any activity, and it is used for code optimization or code reusability. We also have the syntax here, where there is an access modifier, return type, method name and parameter list. Okay, so here if you have noticed, this method name M is small, that means this has to be a lowercase whenever we are writing any method name. Okay, then We talked about objects, where we discussed that objects are instances of a class and they are the real world entities which occupies memory. Okay, and this object has a name, not a name, basically an identity, a state or an attribute, and a behavior. This behavior are the methods that we already discussed. Okay, in this case it is eat and chase. So, and how do we create an object? There are 5 different ways in which we can create the object, and we will be sticking to the new keyword because it is easier and most common in use. Okay, then we talked about object creation steps. First of all, we have to declare, and then we have to instantiate and initialize. Okay, so this is how we instantiate and initialize, and then using the dot operator we can call any method. So this is all for today's session. We will talk about this in details through a program, and we will see how all of these classes and objects can be created, and the different methods can be executed under this through a program in Java in our next subsequent session. Okay, thank you so much.